With that, ladies and gentlemen, now I'd like to invite Wing Commander Shashikant Kopikar, Vayu Medal, retired Indian Air Force, to moderate our next session on Skill India, Manpower Planning and Training, Legal. Our speakers for this session are Mr. Anuj Prasad, Head Aerospace and Defense, Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, and Mr. Rachit Bhatnagar, CEO, Aerospace and Aviation Sector Skill Council.
Good evening, both of you, and welcome to this final session of Economic Times Aviation and Aerospace Summit and Defense Summit 2021.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Not everyone in the industry is legally trained, and it is necessary that most of the entrepreneurs should know the fundamentals of the legalities involved in the defense deals. Similarly, in a world of very rapidly advancing technological world, it would be necessary to have a workforce which almost continuously updates their skills. And this is where Wing Commander Rachit Bhatnagar would come in. I would start with my first question for Mr. Prasad. Mr. Prasad, my first question to you is about the defense deals and the WTO powers. You see, most of the defense deals are international in nature. There is an element of geopolitics and diplomacy in this. However, keeping these two things aside, there are elements which the contracting parties should know. It is against this background that most of my questions or queries would be directed. May I proceed with the first question for you?
Please.
Yeah. Are the provisions of WTO as they stand now applicable to the international defense deals? Let's say government to government contract like in Rafale.
Well, that's a very interesting question. The WTO framework, under it has various agreements which set out the relationships into, say, countries. Important amongst them being GATT, which is the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade. Now, Article 21 of GATT specifically has a security exception built into it, which takes out defense deals from the purview of the WTO regulations. And as such, if anything impacts the security of a contracting party, then the same is not subject to the WTO rules. So defense transactions, much like the Rafale deal or deals with Boeing, which have recently been in the press, those are really not covered by the provisions of GATT and the WTO. And the contracting parties are free to decide on the terms and conditions of those transactions.
Thank you. And I suppose that is how, in the recent weeks, the submarine deal between France and New Zealand, France and Australia, and the F-35 fighter deal between USA and Turkey, when cancelled, could achieve nothing for the aggrieved party. Is that correct?
Correct. So that would again be subject to, what was the contractual framework that they had put in place and whether there is any recourse available under that contractual framework, under the provisions of GATT and WTO, a party really does not have recourse because security of a nation is an exception to the provisions of GATT.
Sorry, please go ahead.
Oh, so that's, there is an agreement regarding procurement by countries, which is applicable or could be applicable to even defense transactions. India is not a signatory to that agreement, and therefore, specifically from an Indian standpoint, the WTO rules don't apply. I'm not sure whether France and the UK and Australia are signatories to that agreement. So they may potentially have some recourse under that agreement. But from an Indian standpoint, there's really no WTO applicability.
Thank you. May I turn to Wing Commander Rachit Bhatnagar? Wing Commander Bhatnagar, could you briefly describe the structure of Skill Development Council of India?
Right, sir. So, thank you for the question, sir. So let me quickly take you to the process and the structure of the Skill India ecosystem as such, and also specifically on the aerospace and aviation, or you can say the aerospace also entails the aerospace and defense ecosystem, skilling system in the country. So let me tell you that firstly that AASSC, what we as an entity are, Aerospace and Aviation Sector Skill Council, we are the industry-led awarding body under the National Skill Development Corporation, which is the government of Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship funded PPP body. Under that, they have evolved over the last 5 to 6 years. They evolved an ecosystem of something called sector skill councils, which are presently 36 to 37 in number. They are looking at the reskilling and upskilling parts for all the specific industry sectors. In that domain, we have been set up in Bangalore and as a Section 8 no-profit company. The main promoters of the company, besides the NSDC and the Ministry of Skill Development, are the biggest PSU of India, that is HAL, having more than 50% stake, and the two more companies which are like Society of Indian Aerospace Technologies and Industries, CIT, and one local industry body, Bangalore Chamber of Industry and Commerce. So these promoters, and then we have a very powerful and strong governing council members who are advising us on various factors of skilling, which hail right from the aviation domains of airport and I would say completely from the design development side and aerospace manufacturing side, the whole ecosystem. And we are having alignment with the Ministry of Civil Aviation. So they are our line ministry, where completely one joint secretary is empowered to have the completely skill development ecosystem. So with this complete ecosystem, what we do, we have empaneled industry bodies who are members. We have subject matter experts through them, which we had done initially when we evolved. The complete research and analysis was done. Multiple stakeholder consultations were done. And thereof, we had evolved around 90 job roles. Mostly, they were concentrated on the entry-level job roles, which are we can also call as NSQF, the National Skill Qualification Framework. So they were leveled at 3, 4, and 5, and certain job roles going upwards, they become 5, 6, and 7 level job roles. So here, this is the ecosystem in which the job roles were evolved and into 5 subsectors: airlines, airports, aerospace, or you can say aviation, manufacturing, repair, and overall design development, and the manufacturing and assembly. Now, with the industry requirement, we are also developing one more subsector called drones. So these job roles, our basically mandate was to make a national qualification framework. We also call it qualification packs. So now that has been completely made, and so the next step was to have training partners, and under them the training centers, which get accredited to ACC body, so that they can take those curriculums and implement those for the general public, the trainees or the aspirants who want to undertake the training. We also have third-party assessor bodies who would go on behalf of us to the far-flung areas wherever training centers are located, and they will assess and certify those trainees. This is in short what ecosystem around sector skill councils have been developed by Ministry of Skill Development.
That's nicely explained. Thank you. I'll now turn back to Mr. Prasad. Mr. Prasad, in your experience, which are the main areas of conflict whenever two partners are involved in a defense deal which is being implemented? Would you say money matters? Would you say labor and its utilization? Would you say assets? Would you say any other aspects of technology transfer? Or maybe there is something which I have not mentioned. Which one of it is?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. In our experience, what we've seen is really the following. A lot of the disputes could, for example, arise on account of integrity concerns, use of third-party agents, etc. So in the defense ecosystem, that's fairly rife. And therefore, that tends to be a bone of contention between parties, be it a foreign OEM and the government of India, or two private parties. So whether any commission or third-party agents are being used in a procurement. That's number one. Number two, we've seen disputes around the procurement process itself. Whether the procurement process is being validly followed, what were the rules and regulations, and whether there is any bid protest opportunity. So that's another, disputing situation. That's primarily between the government and a OEM which is tendering for a particular contract. In addition to this, much like other sectors, things like technology transfer can become contentious between parties. What is the mechanism of the technology transfer, how that will be implemented, what is the information sharing processes being utilized, whether there is enough support in terms of know-how being provided, whether people are being deputed into a project. So that becomes another area of concern. Financial matters, obviously, can very often become the subject matter of disputes. Be it the payment terms, liquidated damages, indemnity provisions, etc., being activated. So broadly speaking, I'd say that what is unique to the defense sector is really the integrity and the procurement norms. But much like other sectors, financial, technology, even labor, for example, India has a very specific rules on secondment, etc., how those can be achieved. So that can become a bone of contention between parties also.
Thank you. I'll now turn back to Wing Commander Bhatnagar for my second question to him. Wing Commander Bhatnagar, would you explain how this concept of PPP for skill development and its implementation goes towards fulfilling the organizational goals of any of the enterprises, like say productivity, like say maximizing of profits.
Sir,
Would you say that by removing the responsibility for upgrading the skills of the workforce or for the startup to train the workforce afresh, when taken over by the Skill Development Council, leaves the enterprises free to concentrate on productivity, production, and optimizing the best out of their enterprise?
okay. Uh, it's a very insightful question, I would say, which I would say largely very much yes to the overall scenario, in which you're perfectly right that the productivity would surely increase, because the basic purpose of the skill council is that only, where we have a body to take care of all their skilling part. So we have multiple schemes in which the people can do this. So there are multiple entry exit points also on this. So there would be models like I would say a few examples also. There are industry bodies, or especially I would say in the aviation and defense, for which we are talking about the skilling parts and other things. There are people who are working from so many years on the aerospace CNC machinist, as a aerospace CNC programmer, as an aerospace welder. But those people, they don't have certification. They could be trained and skilled on a general CNC machinist or CNC programmer, welder, and so on, so on and so forth. But they don't have certification. So these people try and get some kind of international certifications, which are very, very costly. Similar job or work is being done now by HSCs, who have formulated this National Skill Qualification Framework courses, and we are doing their RPL. This is again an international system in which the recognition of prior learning is done for these ustads or the workers who have been working from so long and have a plentiful and beautiful experience behind them. We also have a system called corporate social responsibility sponsored trainings. So there's an end-to-end thing when an organization is supposed to spend their CSR fund on various aspects, including the skilling, the skill development of the employees. So SSCs participates and do a tripartite agreement with them, and we align our training partners. We skill those mandated workforce through that funds, and so these people get certification, assessment and certification through them. We also have something called fee-based models, in which an individual participant who want to upskill or reskill can also get enrolled in our training partner and again get assessed and certified for the aviation job roles. So these kind of skilling systems which have been evolved, it certainly helps the industry to have a right manpower with them. Besides all this, I would also like to add upon, there's a beautiful scheme by the Ministry of Skill Development and NSDC, something called NAPS, which is a National Apprenticeship Promotion Scheme. This particular scheme empowers or encourages a person or encourages the industry also by enrolling a candidate who's passed recently from the college, or they are even a 10th class or 12th class dropout, to engage them in the industry. They will not be bounded by any formal work act or factory acts. They can enroll them for 1 year, 6 months, or whatever period they want. They can get culturally fit into the organization, and then they will get selected for the mainstream jobs. In the whole process, even the stipends which are given to them as per the state uh, acts on the wages, 1,500 rupees is also sponsored by the government. So these are the various schemes which are empowering the whole ecosystem, especially encouraging the industry to have undergone this kind of skilling ecosystems for the ready to employ workforce. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Prasad, a question for you. You see, the nature of warfare is changing. I'm sure you must have heard about this. New domains of waging a warfare are coming in, like the space or the cyber warfare, and so on. With respect to these two domains, do you think that the Indian laws are adequate to take care of Indian interests in these domains?
So the problem with India in domains like space, cybersecurity, etc., is twofold, and even generally, I think this would apply. In certain areas, we tend to be over-regulated. There is a lot of regulations which tends to hamstring business, to hamstring industry, and too many compliance, too many procedures to follow, etc. So that's one part of the problem. The other part of the problem, and this is especially applicable in areas such as space and cybersecurity, is that there is a complete lacunae of applicable regulation, which would allow for both protection of private citizens as also for commercial exploitation of these sectors. To give you an example, India is a signatory to the Outer Space Treaty. And this treaty is, I think it's of 1967 or something. So it's been around for a while. One of the requirements under this treaty is that a nation state is responsible for all space activities undertaken from the geographical territory of that nation state. So for example, if there is a launch conducted from India, even by a private company, then the Indian state is responsible for that launch and for any liability arising from that. So, to be able to evolve and adapt, and, much like NASA has, let's say, outsourced a lot of its space activities to companies such as SpaceX and Blue Origin of Jeff Bezos. India also, whilst ISRO has done a remarkable and fantastic job over the years and done I don't know how many satellite launches, to be truly competitive in this area, we need to also now allow private participation. There is a lot of interest from the industry, in fact, to get into the space area. ISRO has also, come out with some licensing norms to allow for launches. But we have a space bill which has been pending in Parliament for the last 4 years. So there's really no regulation today which can effectively allow for exploitation of space by private industries. ISRO has done a great job of building an ecosystem and taking it to the cusp of where we can really truly be a leader in this area. But legislation and regulations are definitely needed if we are to follow through on that. So that's insofar as space is concerned. Again, on cybersecurity, we've been, a bit behind the 8 ball. There are provisions in the IT Act which apply to cybersecurity, and the IT Act has been amended a couple of times to introduce cybersecurity provisions. Certain regulators, such as SEBI and the Insurance Regulation Development Authority, have rules regarding cybersecurity which apply to companies within their domain. But we're truly lacking, a national cybersecurity policy. It's been in the works for quite a few years. There is, expectation that we should have one fairly soon in place. But these things need to be developed. The government also, is a bit, for want of a better word, conflicted in terms of, for national security purposes, being able to access private information of individuals. And therefore, it's been, having this back and forth with a lot of social media companies on encryption and the levels of encryption that they are allowed to deploy. But at the same time, that encryption is required for ensuring security, both for corporations and for private individuals. So we really are crying out for a holistic cybersecurity policy, which covers some of these competing concerns and provides adequate protection to companies and individuals, at the same time allowing the government the tools that it needs for effectively monitoring national security. Similarly, we have had a data protection bill, which also is, a layer on cybersecurity in terms of private information, what can and cannot be accessed, which has been in the works for a long time, but is still to be enacted. So again, cybersecurity, much like space, is an area where government regulation and rules are required, and is something which should be put in place as soon as possible. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, very nicely. It has been very informative, and elucidation has been excellent. Thank you. Wing Commander Bhatnagar, would you very briefly enumerate the skills which are defense related and which you have taken up in your syllabi? In our old Air Force terminology, we might name them as trades. Which are the trades in which you develop skills? Any 5?
Out of the 5 subsectors which I enumerated initially, like airlines and airport, these would be counted as the aviation job roles. But the remaining, I would say 60%, the 60% of the job roles, which are the MRO, maintenance, repair, and overall, the design development, and for the BRDs, I would say the base repair depots of Air Force, which are aerospace manufacturing and assembly. So these constitutes around 60% of our job roles inventory. Some of them are like I would say, technical services engineer, the aerospace structural fitter, aerospace avionics fitter, aerospace lab technicians for both non-destructive testing and destructive testing. They are aerospace CNC machinist and programmer, aerospace welder, I would say. Like that, even for the design and development domain, we have aerospace design assistant, mechanical, electrical, avionics system integrator. And for the MRO domain, we have propulsion system technician. We have a propeller technician. We have an engine repair technician. So like these, there are job roles, plenty of job roles, I would say, which are ideally suited for any kind of akin to or defense trade, or can be mapped to the ecosystem or the framework of defense training.
Thank you. Mr. Prasad, leaving aside the government to government contracts, in case of a dispute between an Indian entity and a foreign entity, again, in which the governments are not involved directly, would the case be argued before an Indian court, or does this always have to go to an international arbitration center?
So let me answer that in two parts. Let's first take a standard contract between a foreign party and an Indian party under the defense sector. And then we deal secondly with offset contracts. Now, if there is a standard contract for supply or procurement between two parties, one Indian and foreign, then really the locus or the place of the dispute resolution is a choice between the parties. They can agree, firstly, whether the contract should be subject to the jurisdiction of a court, or whether the contract would be subject to the jurisdiction of an arbitrary tribunal. So that's the first choice that the parties can make amongst themselves. The second level would be that if it is an arbitrary tribunal, the parties can again choose whether that arbitrary tribunal would be, under the ICC rules, would it be under the rules of the Indian Arbitration and Conciliation Act? And similarly, what would be the seat of arbitration? Would the seat of arbitration be in India, in Delhi, for example? Would the seat of arbitration be Singapore, London, or any other jurisdiction? So this is purely open between the parties to agree whether they should have a potential dispute subject to arbitration or subject to jurisdiction of the courts. As a matter of practice, because arbitration is a much more timely mechanism of dispute resolution, the preference of the parties normally is to subject the dispute to arbitration as opposed to jurisdiction of the courts. So that's in a standard contract scenario. The second thing I'd said we discuss is offset contracts. Now, in an offset contract, the defense procurement procedure itself mandates that a dispute would be governed by Indian law. So that automatically makes a dispute, subject to jurisdiction in India. And as such, Indian courts have jurisdiction over such disputes. In addition to that, it's very usual for parties to agree to arbitration, which is again seated in India and under Indian rules. So broadly speaking, the parties have freedom to decide how they would like the dispute to be conducted, except in the case of offsets, where it's really subject to Indian law and arbitration.
Thank you. Coming back to Wing Commander Bhatnagar. From your previous answers, I get the impression, perhaps wrongly, that you accept only sponsored candidates. If I'm wrong, please correct me. But if I'm right, would you consider applications from unemployed youth who may be interested in jobs in the defense sector?
All right. So I'll answer the question in this way that any person in individual capacity can enroll for their own assessment and certifications under various schemes which we are being offered under Skill India ecosystem. They are, some of them I would say, are recognition of prior learning. There is various types in that. So under one type 5, which has been launched in this Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana version 3, which is a completely, any individual can enroll themselves if they are having certain experience in that field of aviation, aerospace, any kind of job roles. The completely online registration, online assessment, and online certification. So completely they can enroll in individual capacity for getting aviation or aerospace related skill certification. That is one. And there are plenty of fee-based schemes in which a training center who undergoes or who implements, I would say, fee-based schemes So a candidate can go and self-sponsor themselves for any kind of courses. So they can choose what kind of courses they want to do. From our website, they can see which are the accredited training partners who have got a authority to deliver those courses through our framework. They can enroll themselves. They'll be certified and assessed through the Skill India portal. Besides, there are various to upskill and reskill themselves. There are various Bachelor of Vocational courses also being done. Degree apprenticeship programs are being done, where I would say they're including as a credit-based hands-on skilling ecosystem, or under the new education policy which has come, the colleges have to have certain vocational courses under them. So they take the job roles from our inventory and implement as a partnership or an agreement, which a student or participant can take on, and they will be again assessed and certified through Aerospace and Aviation Sector Skill Council. These are the some of the schemes in which individual participation, self-sponsored participation can be done by the individual. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Prasad, how are the judges appointed in case the case is referred to an arbitration center? And number two, the Prime Minister of India has in recent times expressed his preference for an arbitration center located in India. How feasible is the implementation of this?
In an arbitration agreement, it's fairly standard to have 3 arbitrators being appointed. It's usual for each party to identify 1 arbitrator each, and the 3rd arbitrator is appointed by a body which is mutually agreed in advance by the parties. It could be a body identified under the Indian Arbitration and Conciliation Act. It could be a body, the ICC board, the international arbitral body, can identify the 3rd arbitrator, and the parties by contract are bound to agree to the 3rd arbitrator so notified. To give you an example, I think under the defense procurement procedure, the arbitration is 3-judge or 3-arbitrator arbitration. The 3rd arbitrator in this case is identified under the Indian Arbitration and Conciliation Act or by an institution like the Indian Council of Arbitration. So the DPP provides for that identification of the 3rd arbitrator. Now, insofar as the question of an arbitration center in India is concerned, there are existing arbitration centers in India. The question is that, an arbitration center needs to have a reputation of neutrality, of highly skilled arbitrators belonging to the body. So, for example, let's take Singapore. The Singapore International Arbitration Center, or SIAC, has now been around for, some 30, 40 years, if not more. And only recently, in the last decade or so, Singapore has become an international center for arbitration, where, parties recognize the procedure, the rules, the quality of the arbitrators of the SIAC Center. So for, an Indian arbitration center to be truly valued internationally as a forum of first choice or preference, that reputation of quality has to be built. And that takes time. It's not something which can be achieved overnight, but with time, definitely. Because we have very qualified jurists in India, and I'm sure that over time, that reputation will emerge.
Thank you. Wing Commander Bhatnagar, in the selection of your trainees, Is there a gender bias? That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is, when you interact, being a PPP project, when you interact with various industries, what is the frequency with which you consider revision of syllabi? And what is the reaction or feedback from the industries themselves when these trainees go back to take part in the workforce of the industry?
Okay, sir. Very deep question. I would say the first part of the question is very simple. I would say in the skilling domain, sir, obviously there is no gender bias.
Yes, now there are even fighter pilots who are ladies, and they are doing quite well, I believe. So it stands. Your answer stands for reason.
And to substantiate that, sir, and to give an example, we have taken part in the world skill competitions in Kazan, which happened 2 years back. And one of the participants who could lead and shine, Miss Archana, on the aerospace maintenance. So she went till the all the regional and Indian skill level. She went for training to Singapore, and she was one of the leading example, I would say, who's the people who are coming out, not only the pilots, I would say the fighter pilots, to the maintenance, repair, overall also, ladies are taking part in a very big way. To answer the second part, let me tell you, Aerospace and Aviation Statistical Council is PPP body, and it's an industry-led awarding body. So under the National Skill Development Corporation, which I told, and other various promoters and other governing council members. So the curriculum and the framework, which has been designed and developed after a widespread research and multiple stakeholder consultation with the industry bodies. Various subject matter experts related to both the defense and the other aviation, and civil aerospace MROs experts were engaged, and that's how the full curriculum was made.
Okay.
Is also the active Aerospace and Defense Committee member of CII and FICCI, besides many others. And we are also in touch with the various MOD departments, I would say, through the Society of Indian Defense Manufacturers, SIDM, which is a body which has been formed recently under CII. We also work in collaboration with the other sector skill councils who are like a capital goods SSC, who have also been given an additional charge for the strategic manufacturing from the MOD. So we go, besides that, we have a standard 5 years rationalization and the revision or updation policies where we have to make our inventory thorough and updated as per the current industry needs. So we do that, we do multi-skilling, and we do so many other things to make our industry required job roles relevant to the technology which is emerging and is present in the industry. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Prasad, this is my last question. Perhaps I'm walking on very thin ice in asking you this question, but I hope you will be able to answer it without endangering yourself in any way. And the question relates to the recent Pegasus controversy. In this and other such matters, is the government of India legally bound to be answerable to the Supreme Court if the issue relates to the defense or security of India and not to any other aspect of life in India?
So, unlike the WTO, there is no exception of defense and national security from the judiciary. So I don't think one can take a position that because a question is a matter of defense or national security, that the Supreme Court cannot look at and examine an issue. The court itself would be sensitive to the fact that it is a question of national security, and therefore may, accordingly give directions. For example, it's not unusual for information to be provided under sealed cover to Supreme Court justices in where there are questions of defense and national security. So the court can definitely look at the Pegasus controversy and pass an order it deems fit. The government would be bound by that order of the Supreme Court. But the court, in giving directions, I think would be conscious of overarching questions of national security. I hope that helps.
Yes, that does. I really hope this answer finds quite wide publicity, especially among those who are politically involved one way or the other. And you and me, I think, should not be stepping on either side. Thank you.
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay. Wing Commander Bhatnagar, my last question for you. We talked about updating of the syllabus and coordinating with various stakeholders, industries, etc., etc. Shall I say that is a horizontally expanding process? Let us talk about it vertically, in the sense, are your syllabi tailored to dovetail into what, let us say, the Defense Institute of Armament Technology in Pune is teaching, or for that matter, what IIM Indore is teaching as a certificate course for ex-service? All yours, Commander.
So can you please repeat the question, sir, because there was some disturbance initially.
Okay. I'll repeat the question. You see, we talked about, or rather, you spoke about wide consultations with the industry in forming the syllabus and updating it periodically. My part of the question now relates to other training institutes of higher learning. Let us say the Defense Institute of Armament Technology in Pune, which has on its roll DRDO employees, serving Indian Armed Forces officers, as also the retired Armed Forces officers and certain civil engineers. IIM Indore has a certification course for ex-servicemen, which provides them the skill of participating in the defense industry. It's a 12-week course, and at the end of it, they get a certificate, which makes them eligible for applying in the defense industry. Do you dovetail your courses with institutes like DIAT or IIM Indore and so on?
All right, sir. I got the question clearly now. So I would answer this question like this, sir. As I mentioned earlier, that the job roles, what we have formulated, were mandated by the industry to be of the entry-level job roles first. So we have aligned them first for the National Skill Qualification Framework from 3, 4, and 5, which have been mostly the technician, fitter, and ground-level executives onwards. But we do have certain NSQF level, higher NSQF level courses, which are allied for like maintenance engineers, maintenance supervisors, or who would be suited for the engineers or the higher management officers also. Those presently comes under the aerospace design and development, those kind of courses. And although we have not, to be very frank, we are not aligned ourselves to to the IIMs or the Institute of Higher Learnings right now, but we can surely look forward for that proposal, sir. We can, although I would say we have done certain programs, certification programs for the, I would say, SNCOs level, where the recently retired some of the technicians have undergone specific programs under like technical services engineer program sponsored through Boeing and one NGO called Learning Link Foundations, and they were aligned to a specific aerospace technical publication job role. It was like a pre-release course only. So they got specifically aligned to one job role, and they got 100% placed also in the company. Similar job roles under the MRO domain also were undertaken, sponsored through certain organization, so that these kind of courses have been done in bits and pieces. But of course, we have not aligned full scale to the requirement of defense retirees or the veterans right now. But I think surely we'll be looking at the proposal, because there have been some talks happening with the Air Force authorities.
General of Resettlement.
Yes, sir, with the naval authorities and the DGR, Director General of Resettlement, where the veterans who have skilled over the years of 20 years, 25 years, will be done a small capsule courses of like under the recognition of prior learning maybe, and they will be aligned to higher NSQF level, where they will be deployed as a trainers for the master trainers in the skilling ecosystem chamber.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I
sir.
think we have run out of time. And before I give my concluding remarks, I would invite Mr. Prasad and the Commander Bhatnagar to throw one question at each other before concluding. Would you like to do that?
Mr. Prasad first.
Thank you. No, how would you see, this, let's say 3 years down the line? What would make you say that you've truly made an impact 3 years down the line? What would be your goalpost?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Prasad, for the question. Yeah, it's a very optimistic question. I would say, or answer I would give, because in the COVID, I would say now getting the COVID into the whole talk, the aviation, the ecosystem has been hit very, very badly. Whatever the projections, assessments were done initially by our, the consulting agency, have all gone flat. So going back to the pre-COVID level, the assessment certifications, what we have been thinking, have slowly picking up again, because the whole ecosystem of aerospace and aviation is linked to like a card game with the flying. So the least we have flown in last 1.5 years or so, the whole ecosystem of the maintenance repair overall, the design development, manufacturing, everything has got affected. So I would say in 3 years time down the line, we will be, I think, able to only come to the pre-COVID level. So that's we are taking the baby steps again to our assessment agencies, the training skill academies. So there have been, frankly, let me say, like it's been more firing than hiring in the aerospace and aviation domain, very, very frankly. So we're
That's unfortunate, but I think that is the COVID truth.
I would say very, very, very hopeful of, like we are in know of some of the recent developments, I would say, and under the ambit of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, so many things are happening. I would say you would be knowing, of course, and all the Indians are knowing that 56 Airbus C295 aircrafts have been contracted with, in which the Airbus is going to put up their manufacturing complete ecosystem either in Tamil Nadu or in Gujarat or UP or in one of the places. The state governments are trying their best to take them out there. There is biggest PSU HL has contract with the 83 LCAs. The whole supply chain vendors are going to benefit, and so are so many, direct and indirect jobs are getting created. And then lastly, we are very, very hopeful of a drone ecosystem. As you would see, there are 1 lakh to 1.5 lakhs jobs are going to get created in another 10 years. Right from the manufacturing of the components to the image analyst to the sensors, cameras, which recently Thales has, vowed that they'll be manufacturing in India. The whole ecosystem and the skilling ecosystem also are going to get developed very, very fast. So these some few aspects are very hopeful, and we are seeing a very, very promising skilling ecosystem in next 3 years. Thank you.
Now go ahead and throw your question at Mr. Prasad.
All right. It's a very difficult part, of course, because I hardly know, although some I could sense,
Can I frame it for you?
Yeah. All right. So I am very passionate about.
Would you help the Skill Development Council in incorporating a basic fundas course in either the cybersecurity or in whichever, or in, let's say, offsets, resolution, or whatever else that both of you mutually agree upon? Would you like to?
We would be extremely happy to collaborate with them and provide our services pro bono to the council, and do whatever we can do to help that effort of skilling up people and providing livelihood. That we'd be very, very delighted to do that.
I think that's a very welcome answer for everybody concerned who wishes well for not only the Skill Development Council or the entire defense ministry, the defense industry in India. My very heartfelt thanks to both of you. Let me conclude this session by saying that both of you have been very free and frank, and you have provided very, very valuable inputs covering topics which are not really covered very widely in the panel discussions on defense. Geopolitics, weapon systems, technological developments, all these do take center stage. But the legal aspect and the skill development are relatively unsung domains, if I may say so. But I think they are important ones. They cannot be ignored, and this must not be ignored. Thank you very much to both of you. And I am sure the others who are watching this will have benefited from your very valuable inputs. Thank you very much.